Vega's reptilian claws ripped into 8-year-old Liam's flesh, shredding skin and spilling blood, as the human boy's agonized screams echoed across Zephyrus Prime, broadcast live to trillions of shocked viewers across the galaxy. Andrew James, Liam's father, and a former Special Forces operative, could only watch helplessly as the Draconis alien brutally murdered his son. The Galactic Council's laws, which forbid violence against any member species, rendered Andrew powerless to intervene. Tears of rage and despair streamed down his face as he clutched his wife Catherine, their anguished cries drowned out by the cheers of the Draconis spectators. As Liam's lifeless body was dragged away by the Draconis authorities, Andrew swore a blood oath of vengeance against Vega and the Galactic Council that had enabled this atrocity. The James family's diplomatic mission had been a facade, masking humanity's true intentions, to infiltrate the galactic community and assess its weaknesses. Liam's murder would be the spark that ignited a fire of retribution, burning across the stars until justice was served. Back on Earth, an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council was convened to address the crisis. The council members, their faces grim and resolute, knew that the time had come to unleash their secret weapon, Project Lazarus. For decades, Earth had been covertly developing a program to revive genetically enhanced super soldiers from cryogenic sleep, soldiers known as revenants. As the Council unanimously voted to activate Project Lazarus, deep beneath the surface in a classified facility, the first revenants began to stir. Their eyes snapped open, glowing with an otherworldly blue light as their enhanced bodies emerged from the cryopods. Each soldier was a perfect fusion of cutting-edge technology and raw, unfettered human fury, and they had only one mission: to make the galaxy tremble before the might of humanity. The Revenants knew that failure was not an option. If they did not succeed in avenging Liam's death and securing humanity's place among the stars, Earth would be left at the mercy of the Galactic Council's whims. The very survival of the human race hung in the balance, and the Revenants were ready to fight to the bitter end to ensure that humanity would never again be victimized by the cruelty of the alien powers that sought to keep them in chains. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, in a classified facility known only to a select few, the Revenants began to stir. Captain Marcus Steele, a legend among the super soldiers, was the first to emerge from his cryopod. His eyes, glowing an eerie blue, scanned the room as his enhanced body adjusted to its new surroundings. One by one, his team, Lieutenant Jack Hawkins, Sergeant John Mac McTavish, Corporal Adam Jensen, Specialist Frank Castle, and Private Ethan Hunt, awakened, their movements precise and calculated. The Revenants were immediately subjected to a grueling series of physical and mental evaluations, designed to push them to their limits and ensure they were ready for the mission ahead. They endured endless hours of combat simulations, strategic exercises, and psychological tests, their enhanced bodies and minds never faltering. The scientists and military personnel overseeing the evaluations watched in awe as the Revenants consistently surpassed all expectations. Meanwhile, light years away on Zephyrus Prime, Andrew James began his own investigation into the brutal murder of his son. Using his extensive network of contacts, built during his years as a Special Forces operative, Andrew delved into the dark underbelly of the Draconis hierarchy. He soon discovered that Vega, the reptilian monster who had slaughtered Liam, was no mere soldier, but a high-ranking member of the Draconis military. As Andrew dug deeper, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Vega's name was whispered in connection with countless atrocities against human civilians on Draconis-controlled worlds, massacres, torture, and unspeakable acts of cruelty. And yet, despite the overwhelming evidence, the Galactic Council had done nothing to stop him. In fact, it seemed that Vega's actions had been tacitly sanctioned by the very organization meant to maintain peace and justice in the galaxy. Armed with this damning information, Andrew reached out to his former commanding officer, General Michael Reeves, now a key figure in Project Lazarus. In a secure, encrypted communication, Andrew laid out his findings and proposed a daring plan. a covert mission to infiltrate Draconis space and gather irrefutable evidence of the atrocities being committed against humans. With such evidence, they could turn the Galactic community against the Draconis and the corrupt Galactic Council. General Reeves, his face lined with grim determination, listened intently to Andrew's proposal. He knew that the risks were immense, but he also recognized the potential for a major turning point in humanity's struggle for survival and respect on the galactic stage. Without hesitation, he agreed to assign Captain Steele and his team of Revenants to the mission. As the Revenants made their final preparations for departure, an almost palpable tension filled the air. Each soldier grappled with the weight of the task before them, knowing that the fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. They had been trained for this moment, honed into perfect weapons of war, but the stakes had never been higher. If they failed, it could mean the end of humanity's place in the galaxy, relegating them to the status of second-class citizens or worse. But failure was not an option. The Revenants had been created for this very purpose, to strike fear into the hearts of humanity's enemies and to ensure that never again would a human child suffer the same fate as Liam James. As they boarded their stealth ship, the Revenants steeled themselves for the challenges ahead, ready to face whatever dangers lay waiting in the heart of enemy territory. The Project Lazarus stealth ship glided silently through the treacherous asteroid fields of the Zephyrus system, its sleek black hull blending seamlessly into the darkness of space. Inside, Captain Marcus Steele and his team of Revenants prepared for their covert mission, checking their weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency. Suddenly the ship's comms crackled to life, and a distress signal filled the air. It was a human freighter, under attack by Draconis raiders. Steele hesitated for a moment, weighing the risks of intervening against the potential intelligence they could gather. In the end, his instincts won out. "We're going in," he said, his voice hard with determination. "This could be our chance to learn more about what the Draconis are up to." The Revenants nodded, their faces grim as they readied themselves for battle. They knew the risks, but they also knew what was at stake. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and they were the only ones who could tip the scales in their favor. As the stealth ship drew closer to the raider vessel, the Revenants could see the chaos unfolding before them. The human freighter was in bad shape, its hull breached in several places, and the Draconis raiders swarmed over it like a pack of hungry predators. Steele and his team wasted no time. They boarded the raider ship, their enhanced bodies moving with superhuman speed and agility as they engaged the alien crew in close-quarters combat. The Draconis were formidable opponents, their reptilian bodies hard and strong, but the Revenants were more than a match for them. As the battle raged on, Steele and his team made a shocking discovery. Hidden within the raider ship was a cache of illegal weapons and technology, far beyond anything the Galactic Council had authorized. It was clear that the Draconis had been secretly violating the Council's treaties, and the implications were staggering. But that wasn't all. As they fought their way deeper into the ship, the Revenants stumbled upon evidence of human prisoners being trafficked by the Draconis. The sight of their fellow humans, beaten and broken, only fueled their determination to bring Vega and his superiors to justice. With the raider ship secured and the human prisoners freed, Steele and his team turned their attention to the surviving Draconis crew members. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. One of the aliens, a young technician named Xarox, proved to be more cooperative than the others. Disillusioned with the brutality of his own kind, he revealed a chilling truth. Vega was planning a massive operation to subjugate human colonies in the Outer Rim, using a new type of biological weapon developed in secret. Steele felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach as he listened to Xarox's words. If Vega succeeded, the consequences would be catastrophic. But Xarox had more to offer than just information. He was willing to help the Revenants infiltrate Vega's command ship and sabotage the weapon. It was a risky move trusting a Draconis defector, but Steele knew they had no choice. He contacted General Reeves and Andrew James, informing them of the impending threat and their plan to stop it. As the Revenants set course for Vega's command ship, Tensions ran high among the crew. Some questioned the wisdom of trusting Xarox, while others feared what they might find when they reached their destination. But Steele remained focused on the mission, his eyes hard with determination. He knew that the fate of countless human lives hung in the balance, and he would stop at nothing to ensure their safety. Light years away on Vega's command ship, the ruthless alien leader oversaw the final preparations for his genocidal campaign. His eyes gleamed with malice as he anticipated the downfall of humanity, unaware of the threat that was hurtling towards him through the vastness of space. As the Revenant's stealth ship crept silently through the void, drawing ever closer to Vega's command vessel, a sudden ping from the communications console shattered the tense silence. Captain Steele's brow furrowed as he opened the encrypted message, his eyes widening in disbelief as he read the shocking revelation from Andrew James. "The weapon," Steele muttered, his voice thick with horror. "It's not new, it's a modified version of the virus that wiped out Prometheus." The other Revenants exchanged grim looks, their enhanced minds processing the implications of this discovery. If the Galactic Council had covered up the Prometheus incident, blaming the colony's destruction on a natural disaster, then they were complicit in the Draconis' atrocities. "The Council's been working with the Draconis all along," Steele growled, his fists clenching. "Keeping humanity in check, seeing us as a threat." Xarox, the Draconis defector, stepped forward, his reptilian features etched with determination. "I can guide you through the ship, to the lab where the weapon is stored, but we must hurry." The Revenants followed Xarox through a labyrinth of narrow maintenance tunnels and abandoned cargo bays, their enhanced senses alert for any sign of detection. The air grew thick with tension as they descended deeper into the bowels of the ship, the only sound the soft tread of their boots on the metal grating. Suddenly, Xarox held up a clawed hand, signaling for the team to stop. "The lab," he whispered, pointing to a heavily reinforced door at the end of the corridor. "It's just ahead." Steele motioned for the Revenants to take up positions, their weapons at the ready. With a silent count of 3, they breached the door, storming into the lab with practiced precision. What they saw inside defied description. Rows upon rows of containment units lined the walls, each filled with a sickly green liquid that pulsed with an eerie, unnatural light. And floating within each tank was a grotesque, mutated creature, its form a twisted mockery of the human it had once been. "My God," Sergeant McTavish breathed, his face pale with revulsion. "What have they done?" "Experiments," Xarox said softly, his voice heavy with shame, "to perfect the virus." Before the Revenants could fully process the horror before them, an ear-splitting alarm tore through the ship, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor beyond. "We've been compromised," Steele barked, his rifle snapping up to his shoulder. "Defensive positions now." The lab erupted into chaos as heavily armed Draconis soldiers poured through the doorway, their weapons spitting deadly energy bolts. The Revenants returned fire, their enhanced reflexes and aim making each shot count. But for every Draconis that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place, an endless tide of scales and claws and gnashing teeth. In the midst of the firefight, Xarox darted to a nearby computer terminal, his claws flying over the keys as he downloaded a trove of data onto a portable drive. Just as he pulled the drive free, a searing bolt of energy slammed into his chest, sending him crumpling to the floor, a smoking hole in his armor. "Xarox!" Corporal Jensen shouted, laying down a withering hail of covering fire as he dragged the wounded Draconis to safety. "The data!" Xarox gasped, pressing the drive into Jensen's hand. "Evidence of the Council's involvement. You must get it to your people." With a final shuddering breath, Xarox's eyes glazed over, his body going limp in Jensen's arms. "Revenants, fall back," Steele ordered, his voice cutting through the din of battle. "We have what we need. Let's get the hell out of here." The team fought their way back through the ship, their path a blaze of destruction and shattered Draconis bodies. But as they neared their stealth ship, a massive figure loomed out of the shadows, blocking their escape. "Going somewhere, humans?" he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. Steele stepped forward, his rifle held loosely at his side. "This ends now, Vega. Your weapon, your experiments, all of it." Vega laughed, a cruel grating sound that echoed through the corridor. "You have no idea what you're up against, do you? The Council, the Draconis, we're just the beginning. There are forces at work here beyond your comprehension." With a roar of primal fury, Vega lunged at Steele, his claws raking through the air. The two warriors clashed in a brutal dance of death, their moves a blur of speed and power. Blow for blow, they matched each other, neither giving an inch. But as the seconds ticked by, Vega's superior strength began to tell, his claws finding their mark again and again, leaving Steele bloodied and battered. Just as it seemed that Vega would emerge victorious, a strange pulsing sound filled the air, a deep resonant thrumming that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Vega stumbled back, his eyes wide with sudden fear. His body began to convulse violently, his limbs jerking and twitching in a grotesque parody of a seizure. And then, with a sickening crack, the containment units in the lab shattered, spilling their twisted occupants onto the floor. The mutated creatures, once human, now something else entirely, rose to their feet, their mouths gaping in silent screams of hunger and rage. And as they swarmed through the ship, attacking Draconis and human alike, the Revenants could only watch in mute horror, realizing that the true nightmare was only just beginning. In the midst of the chaos, Steele and his team fought their way back to their ship, dragging a wounded Xarox with them. The mutated creatures swarmed through the corridors of Vega's command vessel, their twisted forms a nightmarish blur of claws and teeth. The Revenants fired their weapons with cold precision, each shot finding its mark, but the creatures kept coming, driven by an insatiable hunger for flesh. As they reached the airlock, Hawkins and McTavish took up defensive positions, their rifles spitting out a steady stream of fire. Jensen and Castle hauled Xarox inside, while Hunt worked frantically to seal the door. Through the viewport, Steele watched in horror as the creatures tore through the Draconis crew, their agonized screams echoing through the ship. Vega, his body ravaged by the monster's attack, staggered towards the Revenant's vessel, his eyes blazing with rage and desperation. With a final defiant roar, Vega slammed his fist against the airlock, his blood smearing across the reinforced glass. His lips moved, forming words that Steele could not hear, but the message was clear. This was not over. As the Revenant's ship detached from Vega's vessel, the team watched in stunned silence as the creatures continued to multiply, their numbers growing exponentially as they fed on the fallen Draconis. The once mighty command ship was now a tomb, a floating charnel house filled with the screams of the damned. Steele's face was grim as he turned to his team. "Set a course for Earth," he ordered, his voice heavy with the weight of what they had witnessed. "We have to warn them." On Earth, Andrew James stood before the United Nations Security Council, his heart pounding as he presented the evidence gathered by the Revenants. The Council members listened in stunned silence as he laid out the Galactic Council's treachery and the Draconis' plans for genocide. General Reeves, his face lined with worry, watched as the Council descended into chaos, some members calling for immediate retaliation, others insisting on a more measured approach. The debate grew heated, voices raised in anger and frustration. Suddenly a tremor shook the building, the lights flickering and the walls cracking. A security officer burst into the room, his face pale with fear. "Sir," he gasped, "we have a situation. A massive, unidentified object has entered Earth's orbit." On the Revenant's ship, Xarox lay on a medical bed, his life fading away. With a trembling hand he reached out to Steele, his voice a ragged whisper. "The Devourer," he said, his eyes wide with terror. "The Draconis' secret weapon, a planet killer. If they feel threatened, they will use it to wipe out humanity." The Revenants, the last hope for humanity, stood silent and still, their faces etched with a grim determination. They knew that the coming battle would be the fight of their lives, a struggle against an enemy that sought nothing less than the total annihilation of their species. Failure was not an option. The fate of billions hung in the balance, and the Revenants would stand against the darkness no matter the cost. As the Revenant's ship hurtled through the void, the looming spectre of the Devourer filled the viewscreen, its pulsing, malevolent energy sending shivers down the spines of the battle-hardened soldiers. Suddenly, a shrill beep pierced the tense silence, and a holographic figure flickered to life on the bridge. It was Zelos, a council representative, his slender frame draped in flowing robes and his face a mask of diplomatic concern. "Captain Steele," Zelos began, his voice smooth and measured, "the Council has been closely monitoring the situation with the Devourer. We are prepared to offer our assistance in neutralizing this threat, but we must insist that you and your team stand down. Human involvement at this stage would only serve to escalate the conflict." Steele's eyes narrowed, his suspicion palpable. The Council's sudden offer of help after years of turning a blind eye to the Draconis' atrocities felt too convenient. But with Earth's fate hanging in the balance, he knew he had to at least hear Zelos out. Reluctantly, he agreed to dock with the Council ship and meet face to face. As the airlock hissed open, Steele, flanked by Lieutenant Hawkins and Sergeant McTavish, stepped onto the Council vessel. The ship's corridors were eerily quiet, their footsteps echoing off the polished metal floors. The few crew members they encountered regarded them with a mixture of fear and hostility, their eyes darting away as the Revenants passed. The meeting room doors slid open, revealing Zelos, his once friendly demeanor replaced by a cold, calculating gaze. Behind him stood a group of heavily armed Council soldiers, their weapons trained on the Revenants. "I'm afraid there's been a change of plans, Captain," Zelos said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "The Council has no intention of helping humanity. In fact, we plan to use the Devourer to wipe out both your species and the Draconis. This conflict has presented us with a unique opportunity to consolidate our power and establish total control over the galaxy." The Council soldiers moved to intercept, their weapons humming with deadly energy. Steele, Hawkins, and McTavish fought desperately, their enhanced strength and speed allowing them to hold their own for a few precious moments. But the odds were too heavily stacked against them, and soon they found themselves overwhelmed, their arms wrenched behind their backs as they were dragged away to the ship's detention center. As the cell door slammed shut, Zelos's taunting voice crackled over the intercom. "You humans have always been so naive," he sneered. "Did you really think the Council would allow you to rise to a position of power? We've been manipulating your governments and shaping your policies for decades, keeping you weak and divided, and now with the Devourer at our command, we will finally put an end to your pathetic species." Back on the Revenant's ship, Corporal Jensen frantically worked to decrypt an intercepted transmission from the Council vessel. His eyes widened in horror as the message flickered onto the screen. A Council fleet, armed to the teeth, was already en route to Earth, with orders to crush any resistance and pave the way for the Devourer's arrival. Jensen's mind raced, desperation clawing at his throat. With Steele and the others captured, it fell to him to find a way to stop the Council's plan. He had to rescue his teammates and warn Earth of the impending invasion, but with time running out and the odds stacked against him, he knew it would take a miracle to succeed. On Earth, chaos reigned as news of the approaching fleet spread like wildfire. Panic-stricken civilians flooded the streets, while the United Nations, fractured by indecision and political infighting, struggled to mount a coherent defense. The Revenants, the only ones who truly grasped the scale of the threat, were trapped light years away, their fate unknown. As the Council ships entered Earth's orbit and the Devourer's shadow loomed ever larger, the stage was set for a battle that would determine not just the fate of humanity, but of the entire galaxy. The future, once so bright with promise, now hung by a thread, and only the courage and sacrifice of a few brave soldiers stood between Earth and total annihilation. Steele gritted his teeth, his body racked with pain as he hung limply from the shackles that bound him to the cold metal wall of his cell. Hours of relentless torture had left him battered and bruised, his once proud Revenant armor reduced to shattered fragments. Beside him, Hawkins and McTavish fared no better, their faces swollen and bloodied from the Council's brutal interrogation. Suddenly the cell door hissed open, and a figure stepped into the dim light. Steele tensed, expecting another round of torment, but as his eyes adjusted, he recognized the familiar features of Xarox, the Draconis defector who had aided them on Vega's ship. "We must hurry," Xarox whispered, his clawed hands making quick work of the Revenant's restraints. "I've managed to sabotage the ship's security systems, but it won't be long before they're back online." Steele, Hawkins, and McTavish exchanged wary glances, their instincts warring with their desperation. Could they trust this Draconis, who had already betrayed his own kind? But with time running out and no other options, they had little choice but to follow, as Xarox led them into the bowels of the Council ship. They moved silently through a labyrinth of maintenance shafts and service corridors, the only sound the soft thud of their footsteps on the metal grating. Xarox navigated the twisting passages with ease, his knowledge of the ship's layout guiding them past patrolling security drones and armed Council soldiers. As they neared the hangar bay, Xarox paused, his reptilian eyes glinting in the dim light. "There's something you need to know," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I've discovered a weakness in the Devourer's design, a flaw that could allow us to destroy it from within." Steele leaned forward, his interest piqued despite his suspicion. "Go on," he said, his voice rough from hours of screaming. "The Devourer's core is protected by a series of energy fields, each one more powerful than the last," Xarox explained, his clawed hands sketching diagrams in the air. "But there's a small window of opportunity, a moment when the fields fluctuate as the Devourer consumes its prey." "Consumes?" McTavish asked, his face pale beneath the grime and blood. Xarox nodded grimly. "The only way to reach the core is to allow oneself to be pulled into the Devourer's maw, to be consumed by the beast. It's a one-way trip, a suicide mission." Steele closed his eyes, the weight of the Xarox's words settling on his shoulders. They had all known that this fight might require the ultimate sacrifice, but to hear it spelled out so starkly was still a blow. Hawkins, struggling to take a breath, leaned in. "What if we smuggle bombs in with us?" he rasped. "Take the Devourer out from the inside?" Xarox shook his head. "The Devourer consumes raw energy as well as matter. Explosives would only feed its hunger. The only way to destroy the core is to overload it from within, using a specific frequency of energy that resonates with the Devourer's power source. But the process is unstable. Whoever triggers the overload will be consumed in the blast." Hawkins and McTavish immediately protested, their voices overlapping in a desperate plea for their leader to reconsider. But Steele silenced them with a look, his eyes hard with determination. "We all knew this mission might require the ultimate sacrifice. I'm prepared to make that sacrifice. For Earth, for humanity, for my son. But I need you two to help me reach the Devourer, to buy me the time I need to get inside. And once I'm in, I need you to get the hell out of there and warn Earth. Do everything in your power to stop the Council's invasion." Hawkins looked like he wanted to argue further, but a sudden explosion rocked the ship, sending them stumbling against the bulkhead. Xarox checked a device on his wrist, his face grim. "They've discovered my sabotage. We need to move now." They raced through the final stretch of corridor, bursting into the hangar bay, just as a contingent of Council soldiers flooded in from the opposite side. At their head strode Zelos, his once pristine robes now stained with dark splotches that looked suspiciously like blood. "So you really thought you could outsmart me?" he snarled, his voice echoing in the vast space. "The Council has seen the future, and it is glorious. Once we harness the power of the Devourer's core, we shall ascend to a higher plane of existence, leaving you pathetic humans to rot in the ashes of your world." Steele stepped forward, placing himself between Zelos and his companions. He could feel the rage burning in his veins, the anger at all the lives lost, all the suffering inflicted by this mad alien's lust for power. "You're insane," he growled, dropping into a fighting stance, "and I'm going to end you." What followed was a blur of violence, a brutal hand-to-hand confrontation, as Steele and Zelos traded blows across the hangar bay. The Revenants' enhanced strength and speed were pitted against the Council leaders' cunning and ruthlessness, neither giving quarter. Around them, Hawkins, McTavish, and Xarox fought desperately to hold off the Council soldiers, their weapons flashing in the dim light. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with the fury of those who knew that the fate of billions hung in the balance. In the end, it was Steel who emerged victorious, his hands wrapped around Zelos's throat as he choked the life from the alien. As the light faded from Zelos's eyes, Steel let out a roar of triumph and grief, the sound echoing through the hangar bay. But there was no time to savor the victory. The remaining Council soldiers, their morale broken by the loss of their leader, scattered and fled, leaving the Revenants to seize their chance. They raced to the nearest shuttle, Xarox's claws flying over the controls as they powered up the engines and rocketed out of the hangar bay. As they approached the Devourer, Steel felt a sense of calm settle over him. He knew what he had to do, knew the price he would pay. But if it meant saving his world, saving his people, it was a price he was willing to pay. He opened a comm channel to Earth, his voice steady as he spoke. "Andrew, it's Steel. I don't have much time, so listen carefully. The Devourer is here and it's tearing Earth apart. But we have a plan to stop it. I'm going to destroy it from the inside." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Andrew's voice came back, thick with emotion. "Marcus, you can't. There has to be another way." Steel shook his head, though he knew Andrew couldn't see him. "There's no other choice. I need you to do something for me. Tell my wife and my daughter that I love them, that I'm doing this for them, and promise me you'll keep fighting, no matter what happens. Earth needs you, Andrew. Humanity needs you." "I promise," Andrew said, his voice breaking. "Godspeed, Marcus, and thank you." Steel closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his face. Then he turned to Hawkins and McTavish, his brothers in arms, his family. "Get out of here," he ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "Warn Earth, do whatever you can to stop the invasion. I'll take it from here." Hawkins opened his mouth to protest, but McTavish laid a hand on his shoulder, shaking his head silently. They knew there was no changing Steel's mind. With a final, fierce embrace, they parted ways, Hawkins and McTavish racing back to the shuttle, as Steel turned to face the Devourer. He could feel its hunger, its insatiable lust for destruction, as he steered his tiny craft towards its gaping maw. As he crossed the threshold, the Devourer's energy field seized him, and he felt his body begin to dissolve, his atoms torn apart and consumed by the ravenous beast. But even as his physical form disintegrated, his mind remained focused on his mission, his fingers flying over the controls as he input the resonance frequency that would overload the Devourer's core. And then he was inside, a tiny speck in a vast pulsating chamber of eldritch energy. He could feel the Devourer's consciousness pressing against his own, a vast and alien intelligence that sought to consume him, body and soul. But Steel was a revenant, a warrior forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the unbreakable bonds of brotherhood. He would not yield, would not surrender, even in the face of oblivion. With a final defiant roar, he activated the overload sequence, pouring every ounce of his will, his very essence, into the task. The Devourer shuddered, its core pulsing with an sickly light as the resonance built to a crescendo. And then, in a blinding flash of energy that lit up the cosmos, the Devourer exploded, its titanic bulk torn apart from within by the power of one man's sacrifice. The shockwave ripped through space, battering the Council fleet and sending ships tumbling end over end. But even as the people of Earth looked to the heavens in wonder and relief, the battle was far from over. The Council's ground forces, their ships disabled and their leadership in disarray, fought on with the desperate fury of cornered beasts. The remaining revenants, their numbers dwindling with each passing moment, met them head-on, their weapons blazing as they sought to buy time for the civilian population to evacuate. They fought with the courage of those who had already given everything, their hearts heavy with the loss of their leader, but unwavering in their resolve. In the chaos of battle, Hawkins and McTavish fought side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized as they cut a path through the enemy ranks. They were a force of nature, a whirlwind of destruction that left only shattered bodies and smoking ruins in its wake. But even as they fought, they knew that their victory would be a hollow one. Steel was gone, his sacrifice etched forever in the annals of history. And though they had struck a blow against the Council, they knew that the true war was only just beginning. For out there, in the vast expanse of the galaxy, other threats lurked, other powers that would seek to test humanity's resolve, and the Revenants, the last line of defense against the darkness, would be there to meet them, to fight and die, so that others might live. And so they fought on, their hearts heavy but their spirits unbroken, their eyes fixed on the horizon as they awaited the next challenge, the next battle in an endless war for survival. The story of the Revenants had reached a turning point, but it was far from over. For as long as humanity endured, there would always be those who stood watch in the night, ready to lay down their lives in defense of the innocent. As Steel's shuttle disappeared into the Devourer's maw, the nightmarish landscape of twisted metal and pulsing organic matter closed in around him. The air, thick with the stench of decay, clung to his skin, and the walls seemed to breathe and move as if the planet killer were a living, malevolent entity. Guided by Zarox's instructions, Steel pushed forward, his heart pounding in his chest as he navigated the labyrinthine passages. With each step, the Devourer's influence grew stronger, probing at the edges of Steel's mind. Strange visions and hallucinations began to assail him, flashes of his deepest fears and darkest secrets. He saw the broken, lifeless bodies of his fallen comrades, their eyes staring accusingly at him from the shadows. Earth, once a vibrant blue and green jewel, lay barren and lifeless, its cities reduced to rubble and its people to ash. Steel gritted his teeth, his resolve tested to its limits as the visions grew more terrifying, and the physical toll of the journey began to wear him down. His enhanced body, pushed beyond its limits, ached with every movement, and his mind felt as though it were being slowly crushed by the weight of the Devourer's presence. Just as he felt his sanity beginning to fray, Steel stumbled into a vast chamber, its walls pulsing with a sickly green light. At the center of the room, suspended in mid-air by a web of organic cables and pulsing veins, was a small, motionless figure. Steel's heart nearly stopped as he recognized the boy, Liam, Andrew James's son, who had been brutally murdered by Vega months ago. Liam's body, preserved by the Devourer's technology, had been transformed into a conduit for the planet killer's immense power. Rage and grief warred within Steel as he realized that the Galactic Council had not only allowed Liam's murder, but had used his remains to fuel their monstrous weapon. Steel knew what he had to do. To destroy the Devourer and save Earth, he would have to sever the connection between Liam and the planet killer. However, as he approached the boy's body, a voice echoed in his mind, a voice that sounded eerily like Liam's. "Please don't do this," the voice pleaded, its tone desperate and frightened. "If you destroy the Devourer, it won't end the war. It will only plunge the galaxy into greater chaos and suffering." Steel hesitated, his hand hovering over the release mechanism that would sever Liam's connection to the Devourer. The voice's words, so at odds with his mission, filled him with doubt and uncertainty. Was destroying the Devourer truly the right path, or would it only lead to more pain and destruction? Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the chamber, throwing Steel off his feet. Through the smoke and debris, a figure emerged from the shadows, a figure that Steel recognized instantly: Andrew James. James, his face etched with determination and sorrow, had followed Steel into the heart of the Devourer, unwilling to let another soldier die for his son. He approached Steel, his eyes fixed on Liam's suspended form. "Marcus," James said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I couldn't let you do this alone. Liam was my son, my responsibility. If anyone should bear the burden of this choice, it should be me." Steel, his mind reeling from the Devourer's influence and the weight of the decision before him, looked at James with a mixture of understanding and despair. Together, they stood before Liam's body, their minds linked by the Devourer's power, forced to confront the ghosts of their pasts and the uncertain future that awaited them. Outside the Devourer, the battle for Earth raged on. The revenants and the remnants of humanity's military forces locked in a desperate struggle against the Council's army. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, but for Steele and James, the true battle was within, as they faced the most difficult choice of their lives. Steele and James locked eyes, a wordless understanding passing between them. They knew what had to be done, no matter the cost. With grim determination, they turned their attention to the pulsating mass of cables and veins that connected Liam's body to the Devourer's core. As they worked to sever the connections, the chamber suddenly echoed with the sound of heavy footsteps. A group of Draconis warriors, their scales glistening in the sickly green light, emerged from the shadows. At their head, a figure that Steele had hoped never to see again. Vega, his body bearing the scars of his encounter with the mutated creatures on his own ship. Vega's eyes gleamed with a mad hunger as he surveyed the chamber, his gaze settling on the Devourer's core. "You fools," he hissed, his voice a rasping whisper. "You think you can stop me? The Devourer's power will be mine, and the galaxy will tremble before the might of the Draconis." Steele and James moved to put themselves between Vega and Liam, their weapons at the ready. The chamber erupted into chaos as the Draconis warriors charged forward, their claws and teeth flashing in the dim light. Steele and James fought side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized as they cut down the attacking Draconis. But for every warrior that fell, another seemed to take its place, an endless tide of scales and fury. At the center of the melee, Vega and Steele clashed, their weapons sparking as they met again and again. Vega, his strength augmented by the Devourer's dark energy, pressed his advantage, driving Steele back towards the core. James, seeing his comrade's plight, redoubled his efforts, his rifle barking as he felled Draconis after Draconis. But even as he fought, he could see Vega closing in on Liam, his claws reaching for the cables that still connected the boy to the Devourer. In that moment, James knew what he had to do. With a cry of defiance, he launched himself at Vega, tackling the Draconis leader and bearing him to the ground. The two rolled across the floor, locked in a deadly embrace, as Steele rushed to Liam's side. Vega, his eyes burning with hate, sank his teeth into James's shoulder, his venom coursing through the human's veins. James screamed in agony, but he did not let go, his arms locked around Vega in an unbreakable grip. Steele, his heart pounding, worked frantically to sever the final connections that bound Liam to the Devourer. With a final wrenching twist, the cables came free, and Liam's body slumped to the floor, free at last from the planet killer's grasp. At that moment, a terrible sound filled the chamber, a shriek of rage and pain that seemed to come from the very heart of the Devourer itself. The planet killer shuddered and convulsed, its structure beginning to come apart at the seams as its core destabilized. Steele, his eyes wide with horror, turned to see Vega, his claws buried deep in James's chest, a look of twisted triumph on his face. But even as he watched, James, with the last of his strength, pulled a glowing device from his belt and pressed it against Vega's skull. The device pulsed once, twice, and then Vega's head exploded in a shower of gore, his body toppling to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. James, his life's blood pooling beneath him, looked up at Steele, a faint smile on his lips. "Go," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising cacophony of the Devourer's death throes. "Take Liam and go. Tell my son." His words trailed off, his eyes growing distant. "Tell him I love him." Steele, tears streaming down his face, gathered Liam's body in his arms and raced for the extraction point, dodging falling debris and jets of superheated plasma as the Devourer tore itself apart around him. The ground heaved and buckled beneath his feet, and the air was filled with the screams of dying Draconis, but he did not look back. His mind focused on one thing and one thing only: escape. Just as it seemed that all hope was lost, a blinding light filled the chamber, and Steele felt himself enveloped in a shimmering force field. He looked up, his eyes widening in disbelief, as he saw a fleet of ships hovering above the Devourer, their hulls bearing the markings of the Galactic Council. As he was lifted towards the waiting ships, Steele's mind raced with questions. Why was the Council here? What did they want? But as he was pulled aboard the flagship and found himself face to face with a tall, ancient-looking alien, he began to understand. The alien, who introduced himself as Zor-El, explained that not all members of the Council had been in favor of the invasion of Earth. A small but determined faction had been working in secret to undermine the Council's plans and bring an end to the cycle of violence that had consumed the galaxy for so long. Steele, his heart heavy with grief and exhaustion, could only nod as Zor-El spoke, his mind struggling to process the events of the past few hours. He looked down at Liam's body, cradled gently in his arms, and felt a wave of emotion threaten to overwhelm him. But there was no time for mourning, not yet. As he stepped onto the bridge of the flagship, he was greeted by a sight that he had never dared to hope for. His fellow revenants, alive and well, their faces etched with relief and joy at the sight of their leader. Together they watched as the Devourer, the instrument of the Council's tyranny and oppression, was consumed by a massive explosion, its fragments scattering harmlessly into the void of space. And on the view screens, they saw the Council's ground forces on Earth, their resolve shattered by the loss of the Devourer, laying down their arms and surrendering to the Revenants and their allies. The war was over, but the scars it had left would take a long time to heal. As Steele looked out at the stars, Liam's body still held close to his chest, he knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. In the days following the Devourer's destruction, a fragile peace descended upon the galaxy. The Revenants, their mission complete, returned to Earth as heroes, their names spoken with reverence and awe by all who had witnessed their bravery. Steele, his heart heavy with the weight of his fallen comrades, found solace in the knowledge that their sacrifices had not been in vain. The galaxy, though forever changed, was safe, and the threat of the Draconis and the corrupt Galactic Council had been vanquished. As the people of Earth began to rebuild, Steele and his fellow Revenants were offered positions of power and influence within the new galactic order. Leaders from across the stars sought their counsel and guidance, recognizing the invaluable experience and wisdom they had gained through their trials. But Steele and his team declined these offers, choosing instead to focus their efforts on helping their own people heal from the scars of war. They knew that the road to recovery would be long and arduous, but they were determined to see it through. And so, with heavy hearts, they laid Liam to rest in a quiet ceremony, attended only by those who had known him best. Steele, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, placed a single rose upon the boy's coffin, a final tribute to the innocent life that had been so cruelly taken. As the mourners bowed their heads in silent prayer, a sense of unease began to grow among them. It started as a whisper at the back of their minds, a feeling that something was not quite right. Then, without warning, Liam's coffin began to shake and rattle, the sound of splintering wood filling the air. Steele and the Revenants watched in horror as a blinding light erupted from within the coffin, its intensity forcing them to shield their eyes. When the light faded, they saw Liam's body rise from the shattered remains of his casket, his eyes glowing with an unearthly power. In a voice that was not his own, the boy spoke, his words echoing through the stunned silence of the mourners. The Devourer was not a weapon, he intoned, his tone devoid of emotion. It was a prison, designed to contain an ancient and malevolent entity known as the Void. And now, with the Devourer's destruction, the Void has been freed. Panic began to spread among the gathered dignitaries as the implications of Liam's words sank in. If the Void was free, then the galaxy itself was in danger, its very life force at risk of being consumed by the insatiable hunger of the entity. Steele and the Revenants, their instincts honed by a lifetime of battle, sprang into action. They pushed their way through the chaos, their eyes locked on Liam's possessed form. They knew that they had to stop the Void before it could use the boy's body as a vessel to spread its influence across the stars. But even as they fought their way towards Liam, Steel could feel the void's power growing stronger, its malevolent presence pressing against his mind like a physical weight. He gritted his teeth, his body and soul straining under the onslaught of the entity's psychic assault. In that moment, Steel knew that there was only one way to defeat the void, only one way to save the galaxy from the horror that had been unleashed. With a final agonized scream, he charged forward, his hands outstretched as he prepared to absorb the void's power into himself. The air around him crackled with dark energy as he collided with Liam's body, the void's essence surging into him like a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated evil. Steel could feel his mind and body begin to unravel under the strain, his very existence threatening to be consumed by the entity's ravenous hunger. But he held on, his will an unbreakable fortress against the void's relentless assault, and with a final desperate burst of strength, he unleashed a shockwave of energy that tore the entity apart, scattering its essence to the far reaches of the universe. As the dust settled and the blinding light faded, Steel's body crumpled to the ground, his life force spent in the battle against the void. The revenants, their faces etched with grief, gathered around their fallen leader, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of his sacrifice. In the days that followed, Steel and Liam were laid to rest side by side, two heroes who had given everything to save the galaxy from darkness. The revenants, their mission complete, began to drift apart, each seeking solace in their own way. But even as they scattered to the winds, they knew that their bond would endure, forged in the crucible of war and tempered by the sacrifices they had made. They were the revenants, the last line of defense against the evils that lurked in the shadows of the universe. And though the galaxy had been forever changed by the conflict, the people of Earth and beyond knew that they owed their very existence to the bravery of those who had stood against the darkness, no matter the cost. The scars of the war would linger for generations, a constant reminder of the price that had been paid for peace, but in the end, the sacrifices of heroes like Steel and James would ensure that the galaxy would endure, a testament to the indomitable spirit of all those who called it home. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.